table of widgets, right? If we select, we'll notice that there are no widgets in there. So let's create a couple widgets so that we can start interacting, maybe query and retrieve some of these widgets from the database, right? So let's create a couple here. Let's create one here with size 2. This is a widget A, and type, this is a header. Okay, and let's create another one. This is widget 2 or B, and it's this might be a paragraph. Okay, let's insert those two widgets. Let's apply. There we go. So we were able to insert it. If we rerun our query, we'll notice that we have those widgets inserted. Make sense? All right, so let's head over to our Java side, see if we can retrieve this from Java. All right, so if we go back to Java, and what we're going to do is that from our service, remember, service is the one responsible for interacting with the database, right? So the way we're going to do this is that we're not going to use an array anymore. Let's just keep it around there for a second. Let's implement this maybe find all widgets. Let's implement find all widgets. Right now it's returning this array, yes, which right now it's empty. So instead of using that array, we're going to use the database. So we'll use the widget repository, which will give us a means of talking to the database. There it is. Now this widget repository is a very powerful object, right? It's a very complex object. It does a lot of things, right? So we're not going to instantiate it ourselves. Instead, we're going to ask the infrastructure, the server, to instantiate it for us, get it up and running. You know, it needs to do a lot of things. It needs to connect to a database, right? Usually it maintains not just one connection, but a pool of connections that can be shared amongst multiple threads. I mean, it's a very complex object, right? So instead of us manipulating and maintaining its life cycle, we're going to tell the server to auto-wire this, meaning instantiate it for me, and then just provide me a link, a reference to this variable, so I can use it locally. Okay, there's a very common pattern called inversion of control, right? That you are delegating the life management to the infrastructure. All right, so once we have that, we can now use the widget repository as if we had instantiated this, and we can maybe re-implement this. We can re-implement this to use the repository instead. Repository. If we look at the methods in this repository, we see there's a lot of really useful methods in here. There's delete all, which basically truncates the database, the table. You can delete by ID. You can find all by ID. You can save. You can find by ID, find all, count. You know, you can do a lot of things with the database. In particular, we want to find all the instances right here. Notice the name is very generic, right? That's the whole point, right? It doesn't really know what you're working with, right? You configure that. You gave it in the generics part, so it's called generically find all. We're wrapping it, you know, inside of a more specific function, find all widgets, right? So ours is more descriptive, right? It's for our specific purposes, but underneath it's using this generic implementation. Also notice that it's complaining, saying that the data type that it's returning here, it's an iterable, right? Where I want a list, right? So I'm going to cast this. I'm going to cast this to a list of widgets. Okay, now it's good, right? Now this is being used by the controller. The controller is going to use that find all widgets right here. And it's mapped to /widgets, which is good, right? It's using find all widgets. Now, because our widget service is now using an auto-wired, right? It's using a managed object. Ourselves, we are now a managed object. We ourselves need to also be auto-wired. So to do that, we're going to annotate this as a service, right? Which can then be used in the controller, so that instead of us instantiating you, right, we're going to ask the infrastructure to instantiate you and just passes a reference to you. Make sense? Right? Because we can't instantiate the service until we have the repository instantiated, and the repository is being managed by the infrastructure, so ourselves are also managed by the infrastructure. All right, excellent. So let's refresh. Let's run this again. Okay, so let's try it out, and let's point our browser to localhost 8080, and we have widgets, and notice that we have those widgets, widget A and widget B, which we had inserted earlier, right? So any new records that you insert here, so let's put 4 here, and this is widget C, and this is a heading widget. I'm not following naming conventions here. I'm going to insert that. Insert it, close. If I go back and I refresh, notice that I have access to that widget. Right, so we are storing this in a database. Everybody good?